Welcome to For the Long Run, the podcast exploring the why behind what keeps runners running long, strong, and motivated. I'm your host, Jonathan Levitt. Through personal and professional connections in the running world, I have the privilege of getting to know some amazing athletes. I've always been fascinated by the psychological aspect of running, and this podcast is aimed at exploring this and much more. I hope you enjoy. This podcast is sponsored by Rad Boulder. RAD stands for Real Athlete Diets and is a Boulder-based small business that supports a ton of amazing runners in the trail community. I've used their meal prep services for events in Colorado, and the food is absolutely incredible. They now offer a box available anywhere in the U.S. that has some of their favorites, including a seed mix, an amazing vinaigrette, and if you're still looking for a sourdough starter, you'll find one in there too. They're also donating 10% of all sales from this box to the National Black Food Justice Alliance, which is focused on building and organizing for food sovereignty, land, and justice. Head to radboulder.com to learn more. Welcome back. Today I have Klodian Mitri joining me today. Klodian, thanks for jumping on to chat.
Yeah, my pleasure, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
For sure. So we were connected originally out in St. George, Utah at the Sunto Elite Team camp. And we ran some miles and ate some good food and enjoyed the pools of St. George, Utah. And before we hit record here, you were talking a little bit more about St. George, and I think you like that place, huh?
Yeah, it's a good place. It's a very hot place, and I personally enjoy the heat. I think that's why the Kona Hawaii Ironman is like one of my favorites. I think I just really enjoy suffering in the heat, and it's funny, like 102 in St. George just feels like a nice, cool evening. To the locals, at least.
Nice. Before we go too far, who is Klodian?
Oh, who's Klodian? That's a very tough question. One that I've spent a lot of years trying to figure it out. So I was born and raised in Albania, and that's where you get a name like Klodian. It's not very Illinoisian or Utah. But I was born and raised in Albania, came to America in the late 90s. Thanks to the hard work of my parents. And since then, just been kind of bouncing all around the U.S., the world. I am married to an amazing woman. We have 2 kids, 2 and under, which makes it challenging, but we love living life as a family. I look at it as like I've married my best friend, and I definitely want to enjoy the spoils of the world. We love to travel pre-COVID, and we've had to adjust during COVID. But we love to travel. We love moving. We love being outdoors. And we just love showing the beauty of the world to our kids.
Totally. So how old were you when you came to the States?
I was almost 8 when I came to the States. So I still remember a lot about Albania. We still have a lot of family out there. We still try to visit when we can. It's definitely a big part of what makes me me.
What was it like growing up, having moved somewhere very far away from where you were born?
Oh man, it's nuts because it feels like a totally different life. Albania is a very poor country, and my parents back there, they were successful in what they were doing. They were successful engineers. They did architect type work. And then they came here with like no degrees. So we went from having a very comfortable middle class life to essentially my dad came to America with $1,000 in his pocket and was like, okay, we're sacrificing literally all of this for you and your sister. And, just this summer has finally come to fruition. I feel like I am successful in my job. My sister just completed medical school. So the fact that they have successful kids, I think made all their sacrifices worth it. And just seeing the fact that I can enjoy my life to the fullest. And you know how they say the cliche of like a father's dream is to make their children's lives better. I definitely owe my life being the way it is to my dad. And, I want to pass that on to my kids as well.
What are some of the ways that you've tried to pay it forward? So at least so far, I mean, the kids are super young, but what are some of the ways that you've been mindful of that?
Um, that's a very good question, and one that I was actually thinking about a lot lately. I think being a parent is so hard, especially trying to dedicate as much of your attention to them. I honestly think I would be a horrible father if it wasn't for my wife. She, I think, goes above and beyond patiently teaching them how to be kind, how to love, how to do things that I think are difficult as a parent, because from my perspective, it's like, oh, I want to put food on the table. I want to make sure that I'm taking care of their college education down the road. I want to make sure that they're in a safe home. But those um, fundamental, uh, intangible things that you can't provide for, I think that's where my wife really steps up and has taught me to help teach those. I think with everything kind of going on in this world right now, I think the most important thing that you can teach your kids early on is to love.
Yeah, I love that. No pun intended. Uh, what has it been like for your kids the last couple of weeks and months? Is it something that they can comprehend, or are they a little young for that?
Uh, that's interesting because we honestly moved to Salt Lake in January. Before that, we've spent about the last 2 years just living out of hotels, Airbnbs, short term apartment rentals, just because the first year of my daughter being born, we decided to move to Germany. And we kind of spent a lot of time traveling through Europe. And then the last year, we spent a good 6 months living in Kauai and Hawaii. So we were finally setting up a home base in January. And then as soon as we set up a home base, we're excited to get more involved in the neighborhood. Um, our kids are as into other people as my wife and I are. We're a very social family. So as soon as we
Hmm.
start getting involved in the neighborhood, we have to teach them to cut ties with the neighborhood kids. So, I mean, like every other person in America, going on 3, 4 walks a day, and it's challenging to try to teach a 2-year-old, like, hey, those are our friends, but you can't go play with them. Um, so that's been hard, and I think it definitely saddens her when she can't go and play with the different girls and boys in the neighborhood. And, I think we're even seeing that in ourselves as adults and trying to kind of comprehend that, like, hey, I can't go and hang out with all these people for risk of contamination. I think it's challenging for everyone.
What have you been doing personally to stay occupied?
Uh, I, moving to Utah, I've taken advantage of the beauty that is Utah. Like Um, we weren't really sure where we were going to move. We had narrowed it down to Southern California, Austin, Texas, Portland, Seattle, the Pacific Northwest, which is also beautiful. But ultimately, Salt Lake won it over. I think after a while, the mountains were just calling us. So I've been staying very busy, just uh, finding new roads to ride. I've gotten really into trail running just because there's so much that Utah offers. I'm definitely fine with not swimming because I hated swimming before. So if somehow Ironman can cancel the swim altogether down the road, that'd be great. But it's been less focused on intensity training, but more focused on just enjoying just enjoying moving, just enjoying movement. And I think there's no better place to enjoy being outdoors and taking advantage of that than Salt Lake.
Definitely. So, what got you into endurance sports?
It was actually all very accidental. I was the type of guy all through college. Well, let's start off in high school. All through high school, I, I think I was on the varsity couch potato team, where I pretty much spent every summer watching TV, and I excelled at it. Um, so I wasn't much of an active person during high school. I was more focused on education since my parents, sacrificed so much for my sister and I, it was all education. So I kind of use that as an excuse not to be active and to be like, oh, I'm focusing on my education by watching TV. But then skip
Right.
forward to college. I definitely enjoyed college. I went to Marquette in Milwaukee. And all I did to stay physically fit was pretty much just lift weights because that's what everyone did in college, right? To impress girls. After 4 years of
The
not impressing any
12
girls.
ounce curls, right?
What?
Just
Yeah.
the 12 ounce curls or full actual weights?
Yeah. I think I upgraded all the way to 20 pounds. It was great. Curls for the girls for sure. But
Yeah,
after four
nice.
years of not impressing anyone with how I looked in my sleeveless tank top, it was about a year after college when I was working full time. I asked a buddy, his name is Mike Kedzie. I was like, "Hey, what are you doing this weekend?" And he was like, "Oh, I'm doing the Chicago Triathlon." I was like, "What's that? That sounds interesting." So it was just the sprint distance that he was doing that Saturday, and this is on a Tuesday. I was like, "Oh, well, I have nothing going on. I think I'm going to sign up." So I signed up. I bought this from like a thrift store, this aluminum bike from the 70s. It was a Panasonic. Fun fact, Panasonic makes bikes at some point. And it was a very, very outdated bike. And I borrowed his pool pass and doggy paddled a few lengths of the pool. And I went ahead and did my first sprint triathlon. It was like one of the hardest things I did. But how much it challenged me, it was unreal. I was like, people do this, and this is fun and hard. I want to do more of it.
And how did you go from your first sprint triathlon where you had 3 days of training and tapering into doing a full Ironman in Kona?
Well, it's a good point. I just want to highlight the fact that I had 24 years of tapering and 3 days of exercising. So I think I was ready for this triathlon.
Well, you weren't overtrained.
Yeah, I definitely was not overtrained. Well, the logical step after suffering through a sprint triathlon is I want to do an Ironman, right? So I signed up for an Ironman, and luckily I changed my training. Instead of lifting every day, I started lifting every day and doing a 5K run every other day and doing a spin class at the local YMCA once a week. So I definitely trained appropriately for my first Ironman. But it's
good.
After a year of spin classes and a 5K every other day, I was still able to finish in about 14 hours. So, but it was like one of the hardest things I had ever done. And again, I went into that with the mentality that, okay, I'll do an Ironman, check it off the box, never do one again. And it's actually kind of funny because I showed up to the race with no wetsuit because, wetsuits are expensive. Like, for example, a Roka Maverick can be anywhere like $800, $900 for like a top of the line wetsuit. And even the cheap ones are maybe like $200, $300. I was like, why am I going to buy something when I'm only going to do this once? I was like, if anything, I'll just like, someone's bound to have an extra one. So I showed up on race day. No one happened to have an extra one. So, how was it happen being the last wave of the triathlon? And as the pros are exiting out the water in T1, I'm running alongside a pro who's about my body size. I'm like, hey, can I please borrow your wetsuit? Keep in mind, this is a professional in an Ironman race who swam like a 48-minute swim. And this guy was nice enough. He was like, yeah, sure, just put it back after the race. I was like, no freaking way. And I wish I remembered his like bib number because I would love to find it on Instagram. But like, hey, thanks for letting me borrow your wetsuit. Because like most people would say, get away from me, I'm in a race. But since then, I've definitely bought a wetsuit.
Nice. And how many full Ironmans have you done?
That's a good question. I think I've done about 6 or 7, including Kona. I got into it in 2015, 15 or 16. So about about 6.
And so now are you more focused on running? Is triathlon still sort of a goal that you might come back to?
Yeah, that's the thing. I feel like running is what got me into it, right? Like I remember when I um started getting into triathlon, running was the easiest thing to do because I could do it anywhere. All I needed was a pair of running shoes, and it started becoming very therapeutic and euphoric to me. Um, and since then, I did my first marathon around the same time as my first Ironman, and I went about 4:09 at the Chicago Marathon. I'm like, that's not bad. Like I ran an entire marathon and I only stopped once. Like that's pretty neat. Like 4 hours is pretty fast. And then the following year I went 3:35. Then the following year after that I went 2:55. Then my fourth marathon was Boston, the year of the crazy hail and wind and cold, and I went about 2:52 about. So then I after this last Kona Ironman, I was like, I want to go all in on the marathon, find like the first race as the season opens up, and just see what I can do. So it was a very awkward build, but I finally hit the 2:40 mark. But it made me realize like I really enjoy running, and I never ever thought I would be a 2:40 marathoner. Never did I think that.
Yeah.
So just the fact that I've been able to achieve this, it's kind of blown my mind, and I want to see how fast and how far I can go. Because just the fact that just a year and a half ago, my PR was 2:55 and now it's 2:40. Like I know I'll reach that point where the gains are going to be less significant, where I'm chasing seconds for a PR rather than minutes. But I really want to tap into that and see where my limits really are, as cliche as that sounds.
Do you have a time that you think you're capable of, or like a big scary goal that you want, you've put on the calendar for 2025 that you want to have accomplished it by?
Yeah.
Or is it just keep digging and see what you can do?
Definitely keep digging and see what I can do. But I mean, I've like thought about it a lot, and we all look at the different timetables, right, for a marathon. Be like, oh, in order to do this
Right.
type of time, I need to do these kind of spots. Like we've all done it, right? Or like we hear like the marathon or
Right.
the Olympic qualifier is like 2:19. What does someone have to do to run 2:19? And you're like, okay, yeah, I definitely can't do that. But so you start setting what you think your glass ceiling is, and I don't know. I think maybe one day, if I actually train appropriately, I think I could probably get like I don't know why. I've never said this to anyone, but maybe a 2:28 possibly. I don't know.
Cool. Yeah, that's pretty
Not
quick.
numbers, but
And yeah, I mean, it's what, like 90 minutes faster than your first.
well, my first was 4:09, 2:20. Yeah,
Oh,
definitely.
yeah, even more.
Yeah. Huh.
That's some progress. I talked with a woman who went from 4 and change to I think 2:37 or 2:36, and she's got her sights set on cracking 2:35, and I think that's some fast times. I ran 2:59 last spring, and my coach was like, "All right, great. Now let's get into the 2:40s." And it was the same thing. I was like, I never would have imagined that I could be someone who could run that fast or has the potential to run that fast. But that's the cool thing. Like if you suspend the idea of having limits and just like do the work, you can go pretty far.
100%. And you mentioned the fact of a coach, right? Like the reason why I say I'm finally tapping into how the appropriate way to train, just because prior to a year and a half ago, all my runs were in like for just to put it in terms of pacing. We're in like 7:30 type pace. Like I was so focused on, okay, what was my average pace for this workout? How many calories did I burn? And and that's not the way to approach things if you want to be a strong athlete. Like you need to fuel in order to be recovered enough to hit your training goals for the next day. Like you're always prepping for the next session, right? And it's all about consistency. It's not about what your average pace was. It's about doing, like, every workout has a purpose. And sometimes we get that tunnel vision, but having a coach and a community that's focused on similar goals, I think that's how you kind of tap into your potential and start seeing things a little bit more clearly. For example, you did 259 and your coach sees the progress that you've made and the approach that you've had to your training, that he knows you're capable of 240, even though you may not think of it at that same point. But when you put your trust in someone else who knows what they're doing, I think that's when things kind of open up. Like my coach, when I was working with him, he was like, hey, the workouts that you're doing, like I said, after Kona, my build was literally a 6-week build. And I had no actual running. Like I had broken my foot I didn't start running until like last July. And after seeing the work that I was doing just in those 6 weeks, I told him, I was like, hey, my goals is to go around 240. He's like, hey, I think by next year you could possibly get you could be a low 230 marathoner. I'm like, that's not possible. I think my upper limit is 240. Once I relinquished control to him for my training, I trust in him to get me to where he thinks I'm capable of, because he has that high level view, right?
Definitely. Thanks again to Rad Boulder for sponsoring this podcast and for providing delicious, performance-oriented food for active people. Their catering is delicious, trust me. I've used it, and it is available outside of Colorado. They've also started selling a mail order box of some of their favorite items, and I'm running a giveaway on my Instagram, which is @JWLevitt. Available anywhere in the U.S. for $50, 10% of all sales from this box go to the National Black Food Justice Alliance, which is focused on building and organizing for food sovereignty, land, and justice. Head to radboulder.com to learn more. So one of the things you mentioned was surrounding yourself with community and like-minded people and goal chasers and whatnot. Where are some of those communities for you, or what are some of those communities for you?
Yeah. The one that comes directly to my mind is the Sunto Elite team. I have the opportunity to be one of the elite athletes for that team, and everyone on that team is someone that I've looked up to in the sport over the last 5 years. I've heard their names as some of the top amateurs, some really strong professional athletes, and I was like, man, these people are amazing. Like the fact that they can accomplish this as parents, as just as very ambitious, career-driven people, or just whatever they have outside of athletics, and they still find a passion in that daily grind of training and being successful at what they do. I thought that was amazing. And just the fact that I get to be on the same team as them, I think it continues inspiring me to dig into my own potential, just because if I'm, to me, it's not about the name on the back of the jersey, but it's about the name on the front and what you're representing. And you're representing that sense of team and camaraderie.
Yeah, and it's a pretty special group too. So I went with my friend and colleague Stevie, who has a pretty large background in triathlon. She's done a handful of full Ironmans in the last 5+ years, and so she spent a lot of time around triathletes, and she's like, that group was different. Like they're not your standard triathletes, or there's the not stigma, but stereotype of being a little cliquey and all about gear and equipment and this and that. And she was like, those were the friendliest triathletes that I'd ever met. And part of that is probably due to to the team's management and picking the right people for it. But I think that's the point. It is a really special group. of triathletes and runners, and there were some super cool stories on there. I had Jackie on the podcast recently, and I'll be releasing that episode soon. I guess when this episode is released, that one will already have been released. And her story and just hearing that story was incredible. And there are, a million Jackies on the team, or 50 Jackies on the team, that all have these fascinating stories, and everybody's super motivating.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Jackie and Ryan, they're some of the local heroes I was talking about, because before Hawaii, Germany, Utah, all that, we lived in Chicago. So you heard the Giuliano name associated with all these running and triathlon events. So they were like local heroes. And somehow my first coach happened to also coach them, but I was in the city, they were in the suburbs. So I'm like, it was unreal. The first time I met Ryan and Jackie, it felt like it was the equivalent of like meeting Jan Frodeno or Daniela Reef to me, just because they were just amazing, kind people. And, I always look up to them, and the fact that I can be associated on the same team, I think it's really cool. And as you mentioned, like, these people are unique compared to other triathlon teams, because being around them, you wouldn't figure that they've accomplished what they have accomplished until you actually do your own due diligence and research and find out that they're some of the top amateurs in the sport.
Definitely. So we have a couple of team submitted questions that I'm going to dive into here, and I hope you're ready, because they're really difficult questions. About how many bagels do you consume per year?
Oh man, that's a good question. So I go through probably a dozen a week, and I would say about like 500 to 600 a year. Yeah, I think on the upper end of 600.
Okay. And have you pursued a bagel sponsorship?
I have not. That's good. I feel like the fact that I already go to Costco for my bagels feels like, in a way, I'm already sponsored with how cheap I get them for. So I think it's an indirect sponsorship through Costco.
So do you know the name Chris Mocco?
Yes. Yep.
The pro trail runner. So he pursued a Costco sponsorship for the longest time, and he wasn't successful with it. So maybe you can give them another try, and see if you can get a Costco sponsorship.
That'd be great. I've actually reached out to In-N-Out recently to see if they would want to do any type of ambassador side type programs. I think In-N-Out and Costco are like my two favorite things.
What's your order at In-N-Out?
Oh, 2 triple triples, animal style, and regular fries, not animal style. On occasion, I'll do a vanilla shake with them.
That's an order. It's funny that the next question I have here is about In-N-Out. How do you feel about people who have never had In-N-Out?
Listen, I've had some of the best burgers all around the world. In-N-Out is good quality. It's fantastic. It'll blow your mind. It's just how you imagine, like when you see a picture of a burger, and you're like, because burgers can taste so different, right? Like you'll see a burger from Burger King, McDonald's, from Auchinleck, will all taste different. But it's like, how's a burger really supposed to taste? Like, if you could have one uniform taste for a burger, what does it taste like? In-N-Out's the answer.
So I've spent a bunch of time out in Tahoe, and one of my favorite parts of the drive, at least the first half of the drive, and maybe it's because it means you've gotten through all of the horrible Bay Area traffic, is stopping at the In-N-Out in Davis, and usually it's about 105 degrees outside, so it's nice to get out of the car and go inside. But consistently great burgers at the In-N-Out in Davis, California.
The funny thing is, when we're looking at where we're going to settle, like my wife's requirements for where we should have a house, it's like, it must be in a good neighborhood. It must have a good school district. It must have, like, I want to have X amount of rooms, like stuff that makes sense, right? Mine was like, we need to be within a mile of Costco, a mile of In-N-Out. There needs to be a swimming pool within 5 minutes. And all of those things are met by our current house. So I guess we're both happy.
Wow. That is called balance.
Mm-hmm.
So balance is actually another topic I like to ask about on the podcast, and people have some very varied responses on what balance means to them or doesn't mean to them. So I'm curious, what does balance mean to you, or would you consider yourself balanced?
I definitely consider myself balanced. One thing I've been trying to be better about is be more focused on my tasks. So by that, I mean not trying to multitask too much. I feel like I'm an effective multitasker. I feel like I can get a lot done, but I just really want to make sure I'm committing myself to the right things at the right time, if that makes sense. So for example, I haven't changed what is important to me. What's important to me is family, God, work, my training. Those are always going to be important to me. However, the way I want to approach it is I want to make sure I'm not giving everything 25%. I try to be, if I'm going to focus on training, I want to go 100% these next 3 hours. When I'm with my family, I'm going to dedicate all my time, energy, and resources to my family. When I'm concentrated on work, I'm going to concentrate on getting those things done and not trying to balance things within the moment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things you mentioned was faith. How does that, or does that play into your running and training?
Yeah, like I said, running has become very therapeutic to me. It gives me a way of thinking a lot, especially just the wonderful blessings I have about how like none of this would be possible. I feel like without um, God and just the opportunities that I've had. I myself am a very religious person. So is my wife. Um, and there are often times where I'll run and listen to, sometimes it'll be podcasts with listening to other ambitious people that really I can connect with, but it's also listening to religious talks just because it kind of gives me that peace, that endorphin rush that I wouldn't get elsewhere.
That's awesome. What are you scared of?
Uh, that's interesting. I probably had a very deep answer up until this last week when the answer is now snakes. I had my first encounter with a snake on a running trail. Like, it's finally getting hot in Utah. And last week I was running on a trail. I'm like, oh, another dead snake. And then it moved, and I literally jumped 10 feet in the air. And like I saw my workout after, my heart rate jumped 20 beats at that precise moment. If you would have told me this was like 12 miles into a long run, the fact that I was able to jump so high 12 miles into like a endurance run, I didn't think was possible, but snakes is the answer.
Yeah. Yes, it's definitely snake or stick season in that part of the world.
Yeah.
So I love going out to Colorado and Utah. It's one of the things that I absolutely. It's probably the only thing that I don't like about that area. All of the snakes.
And I think the snake I saw was like a garter snake, so it was like harmless, but it's just like a very disgusting.
Yeah, and it's not something you see every day, or hopefully not something you see every day.
Yeah.
What do you wish people knew about you?
Um, a lot of people kind of focus on just like what I've accomplished in running or triathlon or just see my love for the outdoors. But I think what supersedes that is my love for my kids and wife. And just the fact that, you like having kids or being married should not be some sort of death sentence. It should be just an opportunity to kind of see the world with your best friend or your little mini me's. And to me, it gives me that chance. You know how they say, like, once you've read a book, like, you can't reread it like it's your first time. That's how I feel about different things I've experienced in my life. But I feel like having kids, I'm so excited to teach them how to ride a bike, or just seeing how excited my daughter Adeline is when she goes out for a little quarter-mile jog, and just seeing her pure exhaustion. Like, I just think it's a really awesome feeling. Like, can you remember your first run or how you felt after that? But just the fact that I'm able to experience her first runs, her first everything, it gives me a chance. Like, I'm reliving that, but trying to do it better.
That's super cool. Where can we find you on social if we want to follow along with your adventures and kids and travel and In-N-Out burgers?
Yeah. So my Instagram is Klodian Gosling, Klodian, and then Gosling, Gosling, as in Ryan Gosling, as in the greatest actor of all time. So we're not related. I get that a lot by no one, but huge fan of him. And so I've adopted his last name on social media.
Nice. Is there a backstory to that, or is it just a big bromance?
Just a giant bromance. I feel like, if he gave me the chance and replied back to my DMs, I feel like him and I could be really good friends. But I just feel like he hasn't fully accepted that friendship yet.
Well, just like, your quest for the 228, keep pushing and keep trying, and one day maybe it'll happen.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks, Jonathan.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on today, and hopefully see you out on some snakeless trails again sometime soon.
Awesome. Sounds great, man.
All right. Talk to you later.
All right. Bye.
That's it for today's episode. Like many long runs, it's sad when it has to end. I hope you join in next week on For the Long Run, and in the meantime, happy trails. If you've enjoyed this episode, it would mean a lot to me if you shared it so that others can find it and enjoy it too.